Well, welcome everyone. Uh, Glad everyone can join us today. Just a quick housekeeping note, just to ensure that everyone keeps themselves on mute. And if you need any interpretation, at the bottom of your Zoom window, there is an interpretation button down there. So all you have to do is click on it and select the language you wish to hear. So you have an option between French and English. So you just have to click on that interpretation button and you will be all set. Okay, so we are going to open this, and I would like to, it's my pleasure to introduce Ed Collins, who is the Manager of Indigenous Relations for Englobe. He is a lifelong citizen and resident of Fort William First Nation. Ed has graduated from a local high school within the city of Thunder Bay and then further enrolled with Confederation College. Ed started his career with his community as partner property manager with the Anemki Mountain Corporation, supervising over 150,000 square feet of commercial space. The success of Fort William's land claim settlements allowed for bigger and better opportunities in economic development, and Ed seized this opportunity to broaden and strengthen his skills. With the position as Economic Development Manager, it allowed him to represent Fort William First Nation in various industrial venues, such as the Fort William First Nation Solar Park and expansion to the Bullwater Stud Mill plant, located on the property owned by Fort William First Nation. Ed has sat on numerous boards in the past, such as Economic Development Committee, City of Thunder Bay, BAM Squatta, LP, the CEDC Advisory Committee, University of Toronto Faculty of Law Advisory Committee, President's Advisory Council on Economic Development for Lakehead University, President of Supercom Industries, and Ontario First Nations Economic Development Association. President, the Ontario Director, Council for the Advancement of Native Development Officers, and on the Board of Governors for Confederation College. In 2011, Ed received the designated professional level Aboriginal Economic Development certification through the Council for Advancement of Native Development Officers. Ed is now the Manager of Indigenous Relations for Englobe, where he works to create proper, healthy, meaningful partnerships and working relationships with industry and the First Nations. He has created training programs within his industry promoting and educating culture and issues of First Nations. Ed and his wife Nancy have 2 children and are proud to call Fort William First Nation their home. Miigwech. Ed, I give you the floor. Welcome.
Miigwech. Thank you, everybody. First of all, I want to say bonjour, Anine, hello. Thank you for allowing me here. Before we start, it's always important to do a small prayer. A lot of times I do a smudge, but as we're on live, I can't do that. But these words of wisdom that I'm going to give you were written by a very, who I think was a very important man in my life. People may know him from TV shows, movies, but I had a chance to sit and talk to him as a child. His name was Chief Dan George. If you ever get a chance, read some of his poems. But this is the one that I always bring to the table whenever I go anywhere. I have a copy of it in my wallet as well. So I'd like to start this by saying these words of wisdom by him. O great spirit, whose voice I hear in the winds, I come to you as one of your children. I need your strength and your wisdom. Make me strong, not to be superior to my brother, but to be able to fight my greatest enemy, myself. So, miigwech for that and that. Miigwech for that. So once again, my name is Ed Collins. I'm the Manager of Indigenous Relations for Englobe. in Thunder Bay. I am a member of Foreign First Nation, as Connor explained. I am a pipe carrier for our First Nation. Pipe carrier is a very special gift to get. I was gifted it many years ago from an elder. So no matter where we go, it's very important to acknowledge the lands. And I don't know where everybody is from here, but in Thunder Bay here, we acknowledge the lands. We are the traditional territory of the Robinson Spirit Treaty, and the lands that which I sit on are the traditional territory of Fortman First Nation. These are very important to acknowledge the lands because we are stewards of the land. We are here to protect them. And we're here to acknowledge that. Thank you, Miigwech Creator, for allowing us onto these lands. And as a member of Fortman First Nation, I want to say Miigwech to thank you for everybody out there. If you're near, close, or on a reserve, I want to say Miigwech for myself for allowing me onto your lands in this way. So I sit here and I'm trying to ponder the relationship between our two cultures and their struggles in life. I know from the past, growing up in school, we only had a handful of Aboriginal students in our community, in our school, and a handful of Black as well. We were treated different than all others, but the two of us were treated the same, if that makes sense. I can't sit here and say what it feels to be Black in Canada or around the world. But I could say what it feels like to be First Nation, Aboriginal. Again, I don't even know what to call ourselves anymore. One year we're Aboriginal, one day we're Anishinaabe, one day we're Indigenous. So I don't even know what to call us anymore, but I do know what I am. However, we do share the true meaning of family. We do the true meaning of our rich cultures. And that same whooping from our grandmother or moms with the shoe if we get out of line. So we do share that as well. I can say though that we both have struggles still today, back then and still today, but we are both strong people and we will survive. So these are my openings. I want to say Miigwech again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ed, for these words. It's really beautiful. And thanks everyone for joining us. So my name is Radia and I'm the Global Partnership Coordinator for Africa and Climate Justice here at Kairos. It is really great to see so many faces today. I think it really speaks volume to the work we're trying to do here. I also want to thank our amazing panelists for sharing their lives, their stories, and their experiences with us today. It is a very special day. This is Carol's first Black History Month. And we want to acknowledge the support of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation in making this event possible. Thanks to its National Anti-Racism Fund, which supports organizations to combat racism, promote events and education, and build a more anti-racist society. So with the theme of Black History Month being Black Resistance this year, we wanted to highlight ways that Black and Indigenous activists and communities, as well as people of Afro descent and from the diaspora, have expressed and celebrated resistance in the past, the present, and what it means for the future. And we really hope that this roundtable generates discussions on how we can all together and globally advance the work of anti-racism, anti-Black racism. So we hope to have a very rich discussion. And if you have any questions during the event, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll collect them for the speakers at the end of the event. We are also very grateful to have with us today Adele Halliday, who will be moderating this panel discussion. Adele is the Anti-Racism and Equity Lead Staff at the National Office of the United Church of Canada. She's an experienced anti-racism educator, workshop leader, and award-winning writer. Adele has been involved in anti-racism work with the churches in Canada and beyond for many years. She's currently staff resource to the United Church Anti-Racism Command Table and has been the moderator for the World Council of Churches Advisory Group on Overcoming Racism, Racial Discrimination, and Xenophobia. And she holds a Master of Education as well as a Master of Theological Studies. She's currently studying towards a Doctor of Education. So thank you again very much, Adele, for being with us today, and over to you.
And thank you, Radia, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to today's panel conversation on Voices of Resistance. It's really good that you are here. So I'll be moderating today's panel discussion. So I'm going to introduce our panelists who have some exciting conversations lined up for us today. And as we go, as noted, please feel free to add your questions into the chat, and we will weave those into the conversation. The format for today's panel discussion will be that we will explore 3 different themes, and each theme has a question that each panelist will respond to. And so we'll hear from all of our panelists, and then we'll hear some spoken word and some poetry. It's going to be a fantastic gathering. So our first question today, under the first theme, is what has resistance looked like in the past for your community? And I'm going to invite each of our panelists to share responses to those. I'll introduce the panelists one by one as they begin to speak. So the question again is, what has resistance looked like in the past for your community? And the invitation for the panelists will be to share a story from your community that shows the impact of colonization on community and land, or that shows the resistance of your people. So we'll hear from all of our panelists. The first person we'll hear from is Ed, and Ed was introduced previously. So we'll look forward to hearing from you, Ed. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm kind of shocked I was first, but we'll go with it. So for our community, again, I want to say, you know, I understand it's Black History Month, and June is Aboriginal History Month. And I think it's very important that we acknowledge that, you know, the contributions of Black people in Canada and around the world, you know, made to this amazing continent. So, so I'll go to the question here. So, Foro First Nation has been involved in 3 huge major land claim settlements of lands that were taken, expropriated lands that were taken. One was taken by the military, used for a rifle range. One of the other one was one of the largest land claims in Canada, where they expropriated many acres of land just through the city of Thunder Bay, up through Kakabeka Falls, etc. So we were pushed into these lands and moved over to a mountainish, swampish area on the First Nation. Many of these, where we were before, we had even a cemetery. The cemetery was dug up, and these bodies were moved over to what is known as Foro First Nation today. Sadly, they weren't prepared for these bodies to be moved, and for weeks and months, these coffins were tossed to the sides of the road, and bodies kind of lay on the side until they decided where they want to put it, and finally did. These are things that our community and communities go through and went through in the past. But you know, we're a strong, resilient people, and we overcome many issues. So that's my thing. That's it.
Thank you, Ed, and thanks for reminding us of being a strong and resilient people. So thank you for that, Ed. The next panelist we'll hear from is Ruva, and I'll introduce Ruva. This is Ruva Wekarere. So Ruva is a Black activist whose work is rooted in faith-based social justice. She has an academic background in women's, gender, and sexuality studies and political science. She has been a grassroots activist and organizer for over a decade, as well as worked in policy with a vision towards liberation. She's passionate about the intersections of oppression and how they can serve as a basis for solidarity among marginalized communities. She has served as a community relations officer for Black Lives Matter Sudbury, where she built a community solidarity coalition. And she's currently the Justice, Peace, and Integrity of Creation Coordinator for the Congregation de Notre Dame Visitation Province. So welcome, Ruva. We are glad you're here, and I will ask you the same question. So what has resistance looked like in the past for your community?
Thank you so much, Adele. Yeah, so giving it a little bit of history. So I am from Zimbabwe, and that's where I grew up and was born, and that's where my kind of community's history of resistance begins. So Zimbabwe was for a long time a colony of Britain, and then once it became an independent country, it was still very much run within its government by those white settler colonialists who had moved there. And in the 60s, there was a war of independence that was able to free that and create it was a grassroots kind of guerrilla warfare, war of independence that created an independent nation of Zimbabwe. And that happened even during my parents' lifetime. And that is a story of resistance that has brought me to where I am today. And I always think that that historical context is important for who I've become. And so as I carried that and really internalized it into my own activism, I became an activist starting pretty early on, and most recently I've worked with Black Lives Matter Sudbury for a number of years, beginning in 2020, where we built a movement for Black liberation in Northern Ontario, in communities that I think often people don't think about as having Black history, but they have for decades. And for us, that resistance has been through art very often. So we have been able to create murals and arts programs for youth, and an actual Black Arts Festival for the first time in Northern Ontario this past year, as well as doing every year an educational Black History Month virtual museum and a conference. And these actions, including these actions plus protests that we did throughout the years, highlighting issues of police violence and other issues that really affected the Black community in Sudbury, but in North America as a whole, have really showed the need for this kind of activism and this kind of resistance. And our resistance really centers around Black joy, because for us, it is both about informing ourselves and our greater communities about Black history, specifically in Northern Ontario for us in those instances, because that's where we are based, but in Canada in general, but also connecting those struggles, as similar to my story that I told, is all of the struggles, I think, of the Black diaspora are really connected, and that shows in our activism when we center art and culture and Black joy. And that's, I think, the locus for me of where that activism comes from and where that resistance has come from. Like Adele said, that led to creating a solidarity movement within Greater Sudbury of many different social issues. So from housing and poverty and climate activism, together with Black Lives Matter, we were able to organize around elections in the past year. And for me, I think that is the core of resistance, and Black resistance is that it does center around the issues that affect us, the community, but we are always stronger when we work in solidarity and when we work as many different peoples together, which is why I think that's one of the major parts of this, not only past resistance, but the future of resistance movements for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruva. Thank you for grounding us in your history, the history of reminder of Zimbabwean roots and the struggle for independence, and how the past connects to the present, your current activism through art and Black joy and solidarity movements. So thank you very much for that. Just a reminder for everyone who's here that if you have questions, please feel free to add them to the chat at any time, and we will feed those to the panelists. Our next panel speaker, it will be Patrick. This is Patrick Kabea. And Patrick was born in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Patrick is a Congolese-Canadian award-winning documentary producer who is currently based in Ottawa, Canada. With his films, Patrick has earned a reputation for creating stories which mainly focuses on Congolese colonial and political history and Pan-African historical figures. His 6 short documentary films and 2 full-length features have screened collectively in over 40 festivals across the globe, including 1 Audience Choice Award for Congo, a Political Tragedy, and also getting nominated for the UNESCO Flemish Commission African Documentary of 2020 for his latest film, From Patrice to Lumumba. In 2021, he mentored the inaugural BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, People of Color Creator Program with the Digity 60 Festival. And he also worked as a line producer for the Being Black in Canada series in the Ottawa cohort between 2021 and 2022. In the future, Patrick plans to write and produce a Pan-African history series, which will aim to highlight Pan-African leaders such as Thomas Sankara, Steve Biko, and more. So welcome, Patrick. We're delighted you're here, and we'll ask you the same question that we're asking so far, which is, what has resistance looked like in the past for your community?
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. And all that, I was listening to you talk about my bio. I'm like, no, that's not me. So thanks so much. Actually, I really appreciate that. Colonization took a lot from our people, actually, and there's a lot of ways today that we're resisting, and resistance comes in a lot of form. And today, I actually want to focus on something small, which a lot of people might actually understand in terms of how our people, our communities across the Western world basically is fighting back, and that's hair. And the workplace has always expected us to westernize our hair, to have it a specific way, and that's been to the detriment of our health, physically and mentally. Physically in terms of the chemicals that we've had to put in and stuff like this, and we complied for a long time, and that's the effect of colonization. We complied for a long time, whether it was here in the Western world or in our lands in Africa. And for a lot of Africans, they'll tell you that we grew up where they will tell us to cut our hair a specific way. You had to look a specific, proper Western ways. And but now there's a pushback, I find, and you see that a lot, a pushback to reclaim and be proud of our natural hair. And I find that as a resistance, and with movements across the Western world of Black people of all gender, all race, just unapologetically embracing their natural hair. So I think that's a small, meaningful, but it's a meaningful resistance currently taking place within our communities. So yeah, so just for something as small as hair can also shows how it's empowering us to reclaim the narrative that they told us that only straight hair was beautiful, or you had to do this, or you had to bleach your skin or stuff like that. So I'm starting to realize that there's a lot of reclaiming, and we are unapologetically doing it and just saying that, you know what, this is who we are. Take us, accept us as we are, whether I have my braids or my nappy hair. This is who I am, and you will accept me at the same table as you. So I think I'm very happy to see the resistance happening in our communities right now on something as maybe meaningless or whatever, but it's something as small as hair. That's it.
That's great. Thanks, Patrick, for reminding us of hair and the resistance that can happen through hair, and reclaiming the conversation about nappy hair. I love it. That's great. So thank you very much for that, Patrick. The last panelist we'll hear for this theme, this particular theme question, is Joanne Rachel, who is the advocacy coordinator for the South Sudan Council of Churches. And the South Sudan Council of Churches is a long-term ecumenical and Kairos partner in South Sudan. It is a Women of Courage partner in the Women, Peace and Security program and an active partner in the Gender, Conflict and Climate program. And Rachel works to analyze peace processes, in particular the revitalized agreement on the resolution of conflict in South Sudan, while also informing policies and decision-making of the church and the government. She is engaged in contextualizing and implementing the Women, Peace and Security agenda in South Sudan and the Great Lakes region of Africa, and continues to advocate for the inclusion of women and youth in peace building, governance, and climate change. So welcome, Joanne. Welcome, Rachel. Rachel, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful.
I don't know if you can see me and hear me. Sorry, my room is a bit dark. It's about how we resist colonization and how decolonization is happening. Liberation movements in my country, we've been fighting a number of people, the British, the Egyptians, and the Arabs. So it has been really hard for us to fight all these people, and you can see the mix of cultures. But we're doing this through naming our children with our African names. And we want to do away with foreign names that come to confuse us and make us feel like our names do not have meaning or do not have value. So through naming our children with African names, we are resisting the colonization. We're also changing the language we use towards each other. The language that time with the colonialists, they would say you're less than, you're a slave. If you have a black skin, you're a slave. So we've changed that language that we use towards one another. And we also have free movement through borders. With colonization came separation through boundaries and borders. So having free movement towards each other, so that we remember that we are brothers and sisters, is a way that we are resisting colonization. I'd like to share some words from someone called Ijoma. She's a poet. Just a few words. She says, "I lost cultures, I lost a whole language, I lost it all in the fire that is colonization. So I will not apologize for owning every piece of me they could not take, break, or claim as theirs." So the fight still continues. Our minds are washed with a lot of information that is not true, but we're still trying to fight by making sure that our cultures are still existent. So that's what I can say about how we're resisting. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for reminding us of the importance of resistance through names and language and freedom of movement. So far, we've heard from 4 speakers, 4 panelists, Ed, Ruva, Patrick, and Rachel, responding to the question of what has resistance looked like in the past for your community. And we've heard of the kind of naming of being a strong and resilient people. We've heard of the importance of resistance through hair, resisting through art and culture, resisting through names and language and freedom of movement as some examples of the way in which people are resisting in their own communities and own contexts. So thank you, all of you, for that. We will next hear spoken word. And this spoken word is going to be offered by Devisha Francis. So please allow me to introduce Devisha, and then she will offer her spoken word. So Devisha Francis is 22 and is passionate about neuroscience and linguistics. She is committed to use her voice to lift up others, address systemic injustices, and spread love. Devisha underwent her studies in England, which ignited her love for travel. Her love for community shows up in her volunteer roles as the chair of the St. Andrew's United Church's Transition Committee and as the communications director for Mirror Appel. Devisha also works as a contingent labor analyst at a global consulting firm. And you are welcome to explore more of her spoken word at Devisha_speaks on Instagram. So welcome, Devisha.
Hello, thank you, Adele, for the intro. Good afternoon, everybody. I will be sharing a poem called So I Ask You, and I'll just go ahead and jump right in. I wonder why you shoot first and ask questions later. Why you avoid questions and don't assume any blame, why you shoot to kill when you could stop them with one bullet. 2, if you're really scared. 3, if you're just a racist who doesn't care. How am I not supposed to react when there's a gun in my face, but you choose to shoot the Black flesh of people who just want to live today? How dare you? Go home to your families unharmed, unashamed, when you brought another member of our resilient community down for what? Personal gain. There are only so many bullets our bodies can take before we scatter the streets, but you won't even let us protest in peace. Isn't it horrible that I hope my children don't come out too dark-skinned? Isn't it sad that I cry for people I never once met? Isn't it devastating that I can turn off the news when I'm too overwhelmed, when my tears have dried and my head aches, while mothers, wives, children, brothers, sisters, friends, and communities waited hours for a man who wasn't coming home, who you took from their home? I'm sure their throats burn when they think of your face, and your brutality is the last thing he saw in his gaze. And I don't think it's enough that you have to live with what you've done, because there is not enough remorse in your eyes to convince me you don't believe you haven't already won 2005. 3.5 million guns in America alone, not including corrupt cops or unregistered weapons, 2006. 10,177 gun-related deaths. Believing poor firearm control doesn't increase fatal violence is such a myth, 2007. 90 firearms per 100 people, revolvers, shotguns, rifles, 270 million guns, and millions of lives to follow. I'm dangerous because I'm Black. And you're dangerous because of the badge on your chest or simply the whiteness of your flesh. But one of us gets to shoot, kill, and walk away free, and the other is left to bleed. You always aim to kill us. We are trained to do and say the right things, and still you want to kill us. We are allowed to live and be free and happy, and for that you want to kill us. Who gave you the right to steal someone else's life when your life is surely not more valuable than mine? I've seen, felt, and experienced more in my 22 years than you have in your whole life, yet you continue to disregard all of my reasons to live. So I ask you, officer, white man, white woman, if you were me, you stand staring down the barrel of my gun if I shot to kill with no remorse. Though you are not guilty, unarmed, maybe a little frustrated and a lot bit scared, would you still not care? When your mother cries out in pain, when your children grow up with one less parent, when your community is looking for the one to blame, wouldn't it break your heart that I could get away with everything under the sun, even murder, because I'm Black, or simply because I wore a badge on my chest, sleeve, or shoulder? Thank you.
Thank you, Navisha, for that powerful spoken word. I wonder if we might just have a moment of silence so we can absorb all that was named. Thank you once again, Navisha, for that powerful sharing. Friends, we are going to continue with our panel conversation. We've explored one theme so far: what has resistance looked like in the past for your community, and heard from our four panel speakers. The next question that we're going to explore is, what does resistance look like for you in your work? And I mean, more specifically, we have a sense that colonization and its impacts continue in our time. So the invitation for the panelists is to explore, well, how do you and your community decolonize? What mediums do you use? How do you resist? So again, we'll hear from each of our four panelists. They've already been introduced, so we won't introduce them once again. We'll just move into the questions for the conversation. So Rachel, we're wondering if we can hear from you first, please, around what does resistance look like for you in your work?
Okay, as Steve Biko said, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So we have been oppressed through our minds, and we still feel like we are less than as Black people or African people, people
Unfortunately, Rachel is having some technical difficulties. The internet is coming in and out, so we'll come back to Rachel in a moment. Hopefully the internet will be reconnected so that we can hear her insights. In the meantime, let's move to Ruva to hear from Ruva, responding to that same question. We'll come back to Rachel later on. But Ruva, the question again is, what does resistance look like for you in your work?
Thank you so much. I think resistance in my work has, for me, really been highlighted by the idea that it's not only the work itself, but it's how that work is done. I think that's really resonated with me. I think especially having done activism and organizing and working in nonprofits, something that can very much permeate how we work is an idea of scarcity. And I think for me, that has been a really a liberating factor, has been trying to move beyond that, because I think most of us here can probably identify with the idea of feeling like there isn't enough, there isn't enough funding or time or people to get the things done that we need to do. And I think starting to work from a place of abundance, of not thinking, there isn't enough, but thinking, how can we reshare what is there so that there is enough? It's really helped me to work. It's me to slow down and reflect on the work that I do, which I think is so vital in this work. But it's also helped me to widen what I think is possible, to make the scope smaller sometimes of what I am doing, by bringing in community, by asking for help, by working more in solidarity, because I think when we think, oh, I'm the one who has to do this resistance work and I'm the one who has to dismantle these structures by myself, it becomes an impossible task. And I think very much the way to decolonize and liberate that mindset is to understand it as there is enough, like that this work, the work of justice, will happen and that there is enough to make it happen. So changing the question from, how do we get more resources, or how do we figure out how to work with these little resources, say, how do we reshare and make sure that there is enough to get done what needs to happen, but also let go of some of the ways of working that aren't working, because they exclude people or because they're inaccessible, so that we can bring everyone along within our movement. And those things, I think, have been lessons that I've learned, that I've really kept with me in terms of ensuring that that my work is able to decolonize, and that it's able to be resistant, not only in its impact, but in how I'm doing that work every day. And that's changed not only, I think, the outcomes of my work. I think the outcomes have been a lot stronger. I think we've been able to do a lot more, but also it's changed how I feel and how I'm able to do that work, because I know burnout, especially for marginalized people, for so many people, and especially for marginalized people, it's so easy to burn out on this work. And that expansiveness has really helped me to find rest and solidarity in those I'm working with. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruva, and thanks for the reminder to reframe the question. It's about how we go about the work, challenging notions of scarcity and working with abundance, and that there is enough to do the work of justice. So thank you very much for that, Ruva. So we'll go back to Rachel to hear a few more of her insights. We were able to hear a little bit around the decolonizing the mind. So let's go back to Rachel and hear more of her responses to what does resistance look like for her in her work. So Rachel, welcome back, please.
Okay, I won't put the video on. I think it's one of the things that's making me go off. So I was sharing about the education of the mind and having peer-to-peer conversations with young people about our cultures. And then second is documentation of our oral history. The white people came and decided that they have discovered certain things because they saw them. So, and they consider the oral history as not history because it's not written. So being able to document the things that our parents or the parents of our parents tell us is something very powerful. And I do that. And I encourage the other young people to do that. When we go for conflict resolution, we listen to them on how they locally resolve conflicts. I think that's a way of resisting colonization. And also in my work, I advocate for museums. So we preserve the work of our ancestors. We have to make sure that those that come after us can see what happened, how can we solve issues, how did those that came before us do this. So I think that's very important. And doing this every day and advocating for it every day brings me so much joy. And in a way, it reminds my brothers and sisters that we did not start with slavery, as I mentioned before. We had a rich history that was not written. And if we document it, then at least we will see it. And then those that come after us will see it. So that's how I do it. And it brings me so much joy, and I'm happy to share with everyone else.
Thank you for sharing, Rachel, and we're so glad we could hear your insights, reminding us about the importance of decolonizing the mind and documenting oral histories and education and the preservation of that in museums so that generations that come afterwards can also know what has happened. So thank you. Next on our panel, we will hear from Ed. And Ed is again responding to the same question. What does resistance look like for you in your work? And an invitation for anyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat at any time. So Ed, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
All right, so first I gotta to remember that, well, First Nations create their own rules and their own laws as they are a separate nation from Canada, basically. And you know, we've created powwows, we've got back to powwows, etc. But you have to remember, back in 1921, Canada created a rule that First Nations were not allowed to gather, either for feasts, for dancing, and they permitted us not to, not to do these things. 1885, they created the pass system that not allowed us to leave our First Nations, that we were stuck in our First Nations, and we couldn't leave without the federal government's permission or the Indian agent's permission. And as well, you got to remember, 1950s, for $5, you too could own your own native boy or native girl. So for $5, a lot of people bought First Nation people, and we lost that culture. We lost our rights. We lost our language. It's funny, somebody talked about hair earlier, but as you can tell, I have none. But that defines what Native people are, and it's kind of sad. I heard this at a job that I recently had, where I was the quote whitest Indian he's ever known, because I don't have the long hair. I don't speak like, you know, the Native people that are out there, I guess. I don't fish, I don't hunt. So that's, I guess that creates who I am. And it's kind of, you know, the hair kind of thing. So I want to bring back that. But, you know, we lost our culture, we lost our rights, but we're slowly moving forward and getting that culture, that education back. You know, United Nations created the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. The first person to sign that Declaration of United Nations was Barack Obama in the United States. The last person that signed that was Canada. So that shows you how far back we still are as a nation, or as Canada, that we need to, you know, learn from our mistakes, kind of thing. They've even created the Truth and Reconciliation. We all know about the residential schools, and we won't get into that too much. But you know, we got calls to action, and number 92 of that is trying to convince corporate Canada to have stuff like this, right? And that's where I come into place. We talk about what my workplace looks like. They've hired a First Nation, an Aboriginal, an Indigenous, a Native, an Anishinaabeg person to do a Native, Anishinaabeg, Aboriginal job. So my job is to create that culture, and to explain to people who we are, what we do, kind of thing, right? So when you go into communities, you understand what a smudge is. You understand how to approach an elder. You know, I hold right now, nobody could see this, but I hold my tobacco in my hand as we speak. Tobacco is a strong medicine for the First Nations, and we give that to our elders and to chiefs and people we talk to. So in work, I see it's starting to get a little better. I see that they hired, like I said, I hired a First Nation person to do a First Nation job, and people are actually listening. You know, I have my smudge bowl in my office. I have my door open to any interpretations or any questions. So I think it's slowly starting to change, and that's what I see at work. So thank you.
Thank you, Ed, for reminding us again of history of past systems of not being allowed to gather, and the slow but steady change, and recognizing that we still have a very long way to go. So thank you for that, Ed. The last speaker we'll hear on this section of the panel is Patrick. So Patrick, over to you, please, for responding to the question, what does resistance look like for you in your work?
Thank you. Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Rachel for evoking Steve Bantubiko. He is one of my African resistance movement hero, if you want to put it that way. And so thank you for that. Actually, it was great to hear his name. And as Patrice Lumumba also said, in his final letter before he was killed, he wrote a letter to his wife. And in it, he had two lines which I really love. One of the lines says, history will have its say. And then about two lines later, he says, Africa will write its own history. And in French, it says, l'Afrique écrira sa propre histoire. So Africa will write its own history. And due to colonization, the humanity of Black people or African people is, you know, it's always been hidden behind stereotypes, myth, and all these bad things, you know, like, for example, from the Congo, one of the first books written about the Congo, the Heart of Darkness, right? It's just this bad place where white people shouldn't venture in because, you know, there's cannibalism and stuff like that. So Black voices have always been silenced, only allowed to, I guess, talk to, like, again, like Rachel said, talk by when it's validated by an expert or like the Westerners. It was like politicians, like in 1885. It's interesting, Ed brought up 1885. In 1885, in Africa, that's the year which is called Berlin Conference, or the carving of Africa, right? So you had expert like politicians, bureaucrats, and priests around the Western world who were telling our stories, or who had this bad narrative of who we were. So I think resistance for me in my work is telling our story and representing our history and culture with respect, with understanding, with dignity, and giving our voices its humanity back. I work a lot with Black actors and creators in the community, and we all working toward one common goal, and that common goal is resistance. So basically, resistance for us to tell our own stories, which we've been erased from history. So for me, I think it's as artists and as filmmakers and community leaders, I feel that we kind of have to understand that we have potential for political activism in our work. So in my work, what I try to do is to defend our heritage, our culture, our traditional rights, speaking of our history, so that we can unapologetically tell our stories and be true to history, so that future generation will be part of our history. So really, resistance for me is just telling our stories in, like Patrice Lumumba said, Africa will one day have it say. So it's just, the more we tell our stories, we resist, we break those stereotypes that were created by experts who don't know our culture. Again, like Rachel mentioned, like our story didn't start in 1885 or in 1462 when the Portuguese first got to the continent. It started before that. We had amazing kingdoms and stuff like this all over Africa, the great kingdom of the Congo, of Zimbabwe. And so I think if we write those stories, if we reclaim that, that's my way of fighting this, is just by writing our stories, telling people that we also are people with humanity. And yeah, that's the way I'm trying to fight that, so that we, the future generation, can be proud of our stories and also see themselves with pride, and just say, you know what, this is, our people did this, or our people did that too, and forget the narrative that were written by the Europeans or anybody else that's never been there. We're not the heart of darkness. We are actually a place of a lot of kings and queens and stuff like that, which actually had been there for centuries and stuff, and for millennia actually. So just be proud of writing our stories.
Thank you, Patrick, again, for lifting up the names of Steve Biko and Patrick Lumumba, and reminding us of the importance of telling our stories and challenging the notion of the Black voice being silenced, and the creative ways that you're doing that through filmmaking. So thank you very much. So we've heard from our 4 speakers so far around this question of what does resistance look like for you in your own work. We're going to cycle back to each of the panelists with a couple follow-up questions. So one question for everyone is going to be, what is the impact of resistance on youth in the community? So in a moment, we'll hear from everyone around that question, specifically around youth. And then we'll also hear just a follow-up question for everyone to just go a little deeper into some of the work and a little bit of the sharing that they've talked about. So we'll go in reverse order. This time we'll hear from Patrick first. So Patrick, we'd love to hear from you around that first question. What is the impact of resistance on youth in the community? And a follow-up question specific, because you talked a lot about storytelling, and you have an amazing outlet for that as a filmmaker. For people who are not filmmakers, what would you name for people in terms of ways in which they can continue to tell their own stories, or challenge the notion of Black voices being silenced? So some thoughts around both of those, please.
The first one, actually, it's interesting you bring this question. It's funny, just this past weekend, I was on the panel with Black actors, and we're asking how they're challenging, or what are they doing to change stuff. And one thing I realized, and they were all saying they're unapologetically not taking stereotypical casted roles anymore, right? And this is how Black actors are fighting in my industry, I guess, in filmmaking, for example. They're saying, no, I came here to play Macbeth. I don't want to play the cook, right? So I think they realize that, you know what, this could be detriment to my portfolio, but I'll stick with it and fight this stereotypes and stuff. So I see a lot of people refusing to play those roles because of what they're starting to see around them, that a Black person can also be a lead actor. A Black person can also be the, for example, the last thing I was working on, it was done by a Black woman, Black cast, first Black show created in Ottawa. And there was so much prideness in that, where we seeing roles now of people that we know Black doctors, we know Black lawyers and stuff like that, and we don't have to just be the typecast. So I think the youth in the community are starting to understand that they don't have to play that game anymore. And so it's funny for me, I'm in my early 40s, so working with people in their 20s, seeing that for some of us, we had to play the game, right? We had to play the game to fit in, or to get another gig, or to be called again, where they're like, you know what, I don't want to play this game. I'm not here for this. I went to film school, so respect me as an equal and respect me as a peer. So that's what I love seeing from the youth right now, and I'm in all of them, actually. So that's beautiful to see. The second question, do you mind just saying it again?
Yes, absolutely. It's the question is around telling our stories, and you have a very creative outlet around that as a filmmaker. So for people who are not filmmakers, what are some ways in which they might be able to tell stories or challenge the notion of Black voices being silenced and so on?
Thank you again for that. Before telling our stories, we need to learn about our stories, right? There's a whole knowing where we've gone. We have to know where we're from. So you don't have to be a filmmaker. You don't have to be a writer or a poet or a spoken word person to tell our stories. You just have to educate yourself on who we are, right? We had like people like Kimpavita, who was like the African, for example, Joan of Arc. She was 16 years old and fought the Portuguese Catholic priest and stuff like that were doing whatever they were doing. So like we have those stories where it doesn't have to come out as a film. It can just be as a conversation at a luncheon with your friends. You know, I remember one day somebody told me, "Oh, Patrick, you know, tomorrow it was November 11th, November 10th, and they said to me, tomorrow you must be happy because it's the day off. Your people," and this is a peer of mine told me, your people didn't fight the war. And I was like, whew, that hurts. Because you know what? My people fought for the Belgian colonial troops, right? So I didn't have to make a film about it, just have to know about it and educate that person right there and there. So I think we have to go back to the library and learn about our history, whether it's the Nigerian history, the Congolese history. It doesn't matter what, like just the collective Black history, the Atlantic trade, slave trade, the fact that there's Black Canadian history in Canada, right? All those, we have to learn it. Somebody again once told me, Patrick, yeah, you're Canadian, but your ancestors didn't build Canada like my ancestors. And she was from, I think her background was Scottish. And I didn't know about Black Canada at that point, and I shrink because my Black ancestors didn't build Canada. But then years later, I learned a lot about Black Canada. I'm like, oh man, I wish I could have that conversation back so I could actually tell her about what I've learned. But I think we just have to educate ourselves. There's nothing else. You don't have to be a filmmaker, a writer. You just educate yourself. That way you can defend our culture correctly. Exactly. Sorry, I just saw Black Nova Scotian history. Absolutely. We need to educate ourselves on those things so that we can proudly talk about it. We can proudly put our hand and say, yes, my ancestors as the Kabeas from the Congo didn't build Canada. But you know what? My Black ancestry in Canada did build Canada. So and today we see it in stuff like the CBC show Porters, where we start to realize that Canadian Black people have been part of this history. So Canadian Black history is Canadian history. So let's not forget that, and let's be proud of it, and we don't have to make movies about it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for sharing both about youth resistance and also this broader question and broadening results of history, education, and more. So thank you again. Next, we'll hear from Ed. So we're all responding to this question, this first question around what is the impact of resistance on youth in the community? So we'll hear from you, Ed, around that. And a follow-up question specific to some of the things that you were talking about. I mean, you talked about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and specifically the call to action number 93. And you know, talked about the importance of Canada learning from its mistakes and your own role as an Indigenous person working in Indigenous organizations. So the follow-up question is, what would you say around for non-Indigenous peoples around their own learning and challenging and being in solidarity? So those are the two questions. The first one around youth resistance, and the second one, what's your message to non-Indigenous peoples?
All right. Wow. Okay. First, we'll step back a little bit here. So, growing up, my mother and my father both went to day school. It was residential schools, basically. My mom would get beaten if she spoke her language. So, when we were growing up, we never spoke the language because she was afraid that when we went to school, we would get beaten up by the priests and nuns as well. So we never understood, and we never did our culture. We never did a lot of stuff, Indian stuff kind of thing, right? But now what's happening is our youth are starting to understand that culture. They're starting to get into the beating, into the powwows. They're starting to open their eyes to the language, to the culture. You know, right behind me, even in my picture here, I have a smudge bowl and a smudge in our traditional medicines. Our youth are starting to open their eyes and get into that, and starting to get back to that culture. So, you know, with films like Indian Horse, we were children, and even books like Seven Fallen Feathers that was created about the seven Aboriginal youth that were killed here in Thunder Bay. These are opening the eyes to a lot of youth, and they're starting to understand that the culture has to come back, that we have to start listening to our elders. We have to start understanding the seven grandfather teachings of our past. And I think slowly our youth are starting to get into that. And second question, sorry.
Great, thank you, Ed. If there's something that you would like to say to non-Indigenous peoples around learning or resistance. Yeah.
Okay, you know, I always say, you know, my jokingly, my wigwam's always open. You know, it's as simple as just a simple talk. I sit here on this panel, and I'm in awe. I'm just in awe on the panelists here, and I want to sit with every one of you and sit for hours and hours and hours and hours, drink tea, and I'll make some bannock, and I want to listen to your stories as well. That's what we have to do. That's what we need to do. So for non-Indigenous, non-First Nation people, I think that's what we got to do. We just got to have to sit and talk. We have to learn each other's culture, our rights. We have to understand each other. And again, we talk about the seven grandfather teachings. We have to learn that and apply that to our life. So I'm going to just say, we just got to listen. We got to open our ears. We just got to sit down, have some bannock and tea, and just listen to one another. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much for that reminder of listening and reclaiming so many things, language, culture, reminding us of films. Wonderful. Thank you, Ed. Next, we're going to hear from Ruva. So same question around youth. The question around youth is, what is the impact of resistance on youth in the community? And I'll offer you the follow-up question now. I could repeat it again later, but the follow-up question, I mean, you talked a little bit about challenging scarcity and working from abundance, the reminder that there's enough for all. Practically, how do you go about that? And what would you say to other people who may want to do something similar?
Yeah, thank you. I think around youth, very much like Patrick said, I'm often in awe of the youth, even though I do still consider myself one of them. But even especially those younger than me, to see how far they've been able to take their activism at very young ages. But I think often having to remember that was the way that was paved for them by, you know, folks that are a little bit older and folks that are way older, and that's the same thing that will, you know, happen for them. So I think that for me, that's the impact on youth, is seeing somebody else do it, or, you know, fight for something, emboldens them to fight for even more. And that's something that I've been very, very glad to see in many communities, but I think especially in my home community up in Sudbury, because growing up there, it was very, very isolating to be Black, but not only that, but it was something that wasn't talked about, or I felt like understood amongst my peers, even like adults in schools and things. And seeing even kids now that are maybe 10 years younger than me, how different it is for them. Obviously, there's still challenges, but they're a lot more vocal about talking about things like racism as they experience them. And I think that's been huge, is that the resistance has even just opened those conversations, because I think a lot of people forget that with issues like racism, obviously there are the visible systemic effects, but the interpersonal and personal effects of systems like racism, like if you have different conversations or interactions where racism is present, but you can't talk about them, oftentimes young people will internalize those things and say, well, it's my fault this is happening, because they don't know or aren't allowed to talk about the larger implications of racism. But now that youth are allowed to talk about those things, they can see like, oh no, this wasn't my fault. It was like this person has, racist ideas, or this system is built in a way that's not built for me. And I've just been so heartened and so full of joy at being able to see young people understand those things in a way that's very liberating for them, that helps them understand who they are and how the world works. And it's also a little bit saddening, because then you see younger and younger people really understanding racism, and having to, spend a lot of their time and energy fighting it. But it's also, I think, very hopeful for me, the way it's affected other youth, but also me as a youth, because I feel I have also very much benefited from those who came before me. And able to bring my kind of youthful energy into the activism and the resistance work that I do, and the way it joins together generations. As elders bring the wisdom and youth bring that energy, I think that's something that also youth really benefit from when it comes to resistance. Oh, and the second part of that question about not working from abundance, it's a practice. I will absolutely say that. I think it's one of those things that we all want to come very quickly. And for me, still, I think that acknowledging that because we live within these settler colonial systems, that idea of scarcity is often going to be the first thought, and that's okay, to sit with that. But then to challenge that thought, that first thought of, oh, we don't have enough. And then looking into how can we, then you can look into how you can be more expansive with your resources. And there's some kind of institutional steps that can be taken in terms of, from my kind of experience in nonprofits, turning to your board and saying, either, because I think a lot of time you're being asked to do more with less, and just be like, we have to do less with less, be like, these are, even limiting the amount you do sometimes doesn't feel like, that doesn't feel like intuitively sometimes that it's working from abundance, but it is, because then you can hone the things that you really do and the things that you're really good at. But also looking at, the way philanthropy and grants work, and changing our attitude towards the competition around things like grants, of being like, what if we work together, because I've always found it a little bit wild that all of these organizations working together end up competing for money, instead of being like, okay, so, this grant is best for you and we can help you with this application, and this grant is best for us. And the more we can work in solidarity rather than this competition that's part of it, I think it really helps with that mindset of abundance. And I think the last part of that is letting things take the time they take, because I think we are so inundated with deadlines, and they become so cemented in us that we forget sometimes that nobody's going to die if we don't make that deadline, and sometimes we do have to slow down and say, okay, is this project or is this activism that we're doing necessary right now, or would taking some extra time on it actually give us the resources that we need to make it more fulsome, make it more liberatory, make it more impactful? So just kind of, and I know these things are hard because they're often institutionally placed, but I think the more people who are able to stand up and say, actually, this deadline is unrealistic, is one of those things that can really help us. Or, like, how can we reshare out this money, or how can we retry this, because also with scarcity, we're often end up keeping things that we don't need to keep all the time because we might need it later. And if we can work from a kind of more mutual aid mindset of, you know, if we have extra now, we can give it. And then when we need extra, we can trust that those in solidarity with us will be there to give us what we need. It's a very difficult exercise, especially institutionally, but I think those things can be really, really impactful. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Riva, for sharing how this practice and working from abundance. We'll now hear from Rachel. So responding to that same question around what is the impact of resistance on youth in the community. And then Rachel, a follow-up question for you. You had talked about decolonizing the mind, as well as documenting oral history, museums, and so on. In terms of decolonizing the mind, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that a bit more. What would you say to people around how to go about that? What does that process look like for you? So again, the two questions are, what is the impact of resistance on youth in the community?
Sorry,
And
you
then,
were breaking, so I didn't get.
okay, so sorry. The first question is, what is the impact of resistance on youth in the community? And I know you wrote something in the chat, but I wonder if you might speak to that. And the second question was around decolonizing the mind. So you had spoken about that earlier. So what would you name for people in terms of either how you go about decolonizing the mind, or what you would share for others about how they might go about that? Internet challenges, but she has written a bit in the chat in terms of youth resistance. So I wonder if I might share that. And as she comes back, we'll invite her to share a little bit more about decolonizing the mind. So her perspectives, she's written 4 points. One is love for your own land and your own people. 2 is self-love. 3 is development and the realization that we all have solutions to make things better for us. And 4, it promotes the spirit of Ubuntu, I am because you are. So we thank Rachel for those words, and hope we will be able to hear from her again a bit later. Now we're going to hear once again from Davisha, who's going to offer a poem for us. And just as a reminder, anyone's welcome to add some questions to the chat. Some questions have been added so far. We'll respond to those shortly. But for now, we'll hear from Davisha, who's going to offer us a poem. So welcome back, Davisha.
Thank you. I'm going to share 2 short pieces with you, and the first poem that I will share with you has not been written by me, but has rather been submitted by an 85-year-old Caribbean Canadian who has a passion for sharing her community experience, and her name is Doreen. And so I will share her poem that is called Still Standing. We know for sure that it started in the 15th century. And now we are here and still standing. They came for us and piled us into the bellies of their sailing boats, auctioned us off at their devilish markets. Despite that, we are still standing. Made us hungry so that we begged for bread, kidnapped our freedom just to make themselves feel good. Despite that, we are still standing. We knew better. We knew that this was not the Creator's plan. We knew there was a time for correction, and so we are still standing. Did the Bible say sin was black? Did the Bible say good and God were white? Who cultivated these terrible assumptions? Was this a conspiracy made on the top decks of those ships? Perhaps so. But with God's help, we are still standing. I want to thank Doreen for sharing that. I am so humbled to share that on her behalf. And now I will jump into my last piece to share with you guys, and this I call Pride. My Black is not what I am, it is who I am. My Black skin is not just one thing, it's my beauty, my excellence, quick-lipped, difficult to anger, heart of a fighter, skin soft as a lover. My Black is every tongue-lashing, acne scar, self-harm coming out still glowing. My brown skin is all I've endured, forever hidden, wounds scabbing over but never healing, dried red, fading into brown as it becomes a part of me. My flesh stunk of death until God's breath doused life into me, Davisha. She and I intertwine. No matter what she does, we remind that it is her brown skin, not just her mind. When brown was the least favorite color, while pink flooded daggering brightness, my brown was my protector and I survived. Not in spite of, because of, we bathed in sun, stand out in seas. My brown skin carries the weight of a life I'll never lead, memories I wish to never have, prayers that kept me alive, ancestors who always had to fight so I can rest. So I roll my shoulders and do what's necessary so in peace they rest, knowing all of this told me to hide. But when I see her wrapped delicately in brown skin, all I can feel is pride. Thank you.
Thank you, Davisha, for both sharing the poem from Doreen Crick and also sharing your own poetry. Again, very powerful. So thank you once again. Friends, we're going to transition to the last question for the panelists. And this question is looking forward. So this is around imagining the future and working together. So the question for our panelists are, what do you dream of seeing in the future in terms of the elimination of anti-Black racism, of decolonization and relationship to the land? And what steps might we take as a movement to get there? What are some innovative ways that we might continue this work in our day-to-day work and in our lives? So looking forward, those are the questions for the panelists. And this time we will start with Patrick, please.
Thank you, thank you. What do I dream of? Looking forward, I think things are changing now, of course. Black people have been given a chance to sit at the table. I mean, a small tabouret, you know, part of the big table, but we are getting there. And it is a good start, but we still have a long way to go. So what I dream of is the next generation. I guess it's going to go back to all my three answers here. It's about our history, our culture, preserving our story, telling our stories, being proud in it. So I just want the next generation to be enrich and grow their Black Canadian, if we're going to talk from Canada point of view, their Black Canadian narrative. I just encourage, you know, young Black Canadians to be proud of their history. So that's what I want to see. I want to see us being proud of our history, to look at places such as like, you know, Nova Scotia, to look at places such as, from an Ontario point of view, there's a place called Sheffield Park Black History Museum, which is it's a living history of the first Black settlers in Ontario, you know, specifically in the Collingwood, Owen Sound area. And that was like one of the two northern terminals for the underground railroad system. So places like that, I want Black people in the future to just be proud of it, the next generation to unapologetically tell those stories, to tell the world that we've been part of this country since Mathieu da Costa arrived here in 1604, you know, as the first Black slave or Black person in Canada. You know, I just dream of days where Black Canadians will no longer be written off history books, you know. I went to high school in Hamilton, Ontario, and it's so sad to say that I find out about Harriet Tubman being in St. Catharines. For anybody that knows the distance between Hamilton and St. Catharines, it's about 45 minutes, maybe 30-minute drive, probably even less than that. I find out in my 30s, you know, when I went to high school in Hamilton, it was never taught, but I found out in my 30s through just reading an article one day, finding out that there's Harriet Tubman School in St. Catharines. So I called my cousin. I'm like, hey, you went to St. Catharines. Did you know about this? She's like, no, I didn't. We need to educate ourselves. So I dream in the future that Black Canadians would no longer be written off the history books because we shaped this country. You know, and our stories and narrative should reflect that. So that's my my pipe dreams, if you want to put it that way. That's how I dream. If 20 years down the road, I have twin daughters who are 12 years old. You know, when they're in their 30s, I want them to absolutely know the importance of Black people in Canada. And because this is their Canada, you know, they don't know anything else. This is their Canada. This is our Canada. For the majority of us, we've lived here or we're born here longer than anywhere else. So we need to take ownership of that. My daughter, again, who's 12 years old, one of them, just last week or 2 weeks ago, somebody said, but where are you guys from? Where are you people from? And then she said, but I'm from Ottawa. right? And again, they're 12 years old, that they were trying, the person was trying to make it, she was Congolese, or her parents were Congolese, or whatever. But I'm like, no, you need to take ownership of you as a Black Canadian. This is who you are. So the future is for Black Canadians to not be written off in history, to not be shy to say that we shaped this country, to not be shy to say that, yes, my ancestors built this country as well. So that's what I hope to see in the future.
Great. Thank you for sharing your dreams, Patrick, both for yourself and for your children. Very much appreciated. We'll hear next from Ruva. Ruva, can you tell us a bit about some of your dreams? What do you dream about seeing in the future? Elimination of anti-Black racism and more. So what is your dreams?
Yes, it's funny because I feel like my dreams feel so simple, but also at times unachievable, because my dreams are for Black people to have what they need, to spiritually, like mentally, physically, financially have what they need so they can thrive. Because I feel like so many of us, like so many marginalized people in Canada and across the world, are constantly just trying to survive in so many ways, even when we have what you need materially, like mentally, emotionally, spiritually, often still just trying to survive. So that's my dream, is for Black people to have not only, a sense of history, but also future here. And I think for me, those dreams are also so intertwined with the fates of all different marginalized people in Canada. I dream of a time in the future where like land is rematriated back to Indigenous peoples, and because I feel like those, especially with Indigenous peoples, like our fates for a liberated future are so tied together as they have been in the history of Canada. So that is a big part of my dream for Black people in Canada. And I dream for freedom of movement, so that I can see my relatives in Zimbabwe, and they can come see me, and we can live these lives that are more intertwined, and that that aren't your family isn't defined by immigration status and visa status. I dream for regularization of status for migrants so people can move more freely, and I dream of an anti-carceral world where people have what they need so they are not disproportionately in jail or having getting conflicts and being injured or murdered by police. And these dreams all seem, I think a lot of the time for me, like a pipe dream, but they're really very much, a basic idea of people being able to live out dreams and do the professions they want to do and make art and music. Like I dream of going to the yarn store without being stared at. It's all of these things are so intertwined, it's like really breaking down those, our economic and like government institutions that still enshrine inequality, because that's, the end of it is a lot of these systems don't work if there's not inequality. So it builds, it goes all the way to the top. But so yeah, I guess in like a long story short, those are my dreams.
Thank you, Ruva, for sharing some of your dreams. We'll go next to hear from Ed and some of Ed's dreams. So Ed, what do you dream about seeing in the future in terms of the elimination of anti-Black racism, of decolonization in relationship to the land, and how do we begin to get there? What steps do we take, and how do we continue this work in our day-to-day work and lives? So.
I guess all I could say is ditto. It amazes me how our cultures entwine like that. But if I have to add to it, I dream about a time when I'm not petrified when my 25-year-old daughter is walking down the street. I don't know if people heard about the Charlie Hitch incident that happened here in Thunder Bay years ago, but shiver when my daughter's walking down the street. I dream of a time when I could, again, I can go to the dollar store without being followed around. The dollar store being followed around because of color of my skin as well, right? It's crazy. I dream about a time where I don't have to do this. I don't have to sit in my office and talk about Aboriginal culture and the right way and the wrong way to treat people and treat Aboriginals, even treat Black people, right? I want to be out of my job. I want to work my way out of this job. That's what I dream about. I dream about where, my son, he has a chance to show that he's the right person for that job, not because of the color of his skin or where he's from or if he's the chief's cousin or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I want that dream to be that he is a hard worker. I dream about that the community, our youth in our community, they're having a hard time in all communities, and it's sad. But sometimes drugs and alcohol are the only solution. I dream about a time where they're able to talk and able to speak to, I don't care if it's an Aboriginal elder or a priest or whoever, that they could actually come to somebody and say, here's my problems, here's where I'm feeling hurt. That's my dreams. And again, my dreams are to grow some hair as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for sharing your dreams. So we've heard dreams from Ed and from Ruva and from Patrick. And Rachel also has dreams. Rachel is having internet challenges and is not able to speak to them, but has written them into the chat. So I wonder if I might offer what she has written. So Rachel shares that her dreams are, number one, for any change to happen and be sustainable, it should be structural and institutionalized. That decolonization must pay attention to the education system by teaching the truth about African history and technologies that existed way before colonization. Number two, that oral traditions and wisdom of African people must be documented and disseminated. And number three, that we also need to utilize our own resources in order to stop depending on tide aid. So thank you, Rachel, for those thoughts and insights. So with that, we are now going to shift to any questions that some of you may have. And some of you have been writing in the chat throughout this conversation. So we will offer these back to the panelists to explore. And if there are additional questions that you would like, please continue to add them into the chat. So the first question is actually just specifically for Ruva, and then the rest will be for everyone. So the first question for you, Ruva, is there a website or more information on programs that you mentioned? So things like the virtual Black History Month Museum and the festival. So Ruva, if you're able to respond to that one, please.
Yes. Yes, so blmsudbury.ca, and I can put that in the chat too, is the website for Black Lives Matter Sudbury. And there you can find all of the information, including Black Futures Month, which is the theme of this year's kind of activities for Black History Month, starting on later this week, February 24th. So you can sign up. This year it will be hybrid. So if you're in the area, there'll be some in-person events too, but there will be online panels and educational events. In addition to that, the past year's panels and educational events, where you might see somebody on the screen, are also available on the website. And there's also a link to the Museum of Black History, which is just wonderful. I'm so in awe of all the people who worked on that. But yes, blmsudbury.ca has all that information. And they're also on Instagram and Facebook as well as BLM Sudbury, where you can find more of that work.
Thank you, Ruva. So a website where people can go for more information. So we've heard that. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much. The next one is for everybody. This is more of a comment, but wondered if you might respond to the comment by adding additional insights. So the comment in the chat is noting that Canada's economy today exploits African mineral resources through its role in mining. And the Toronto Stock Exchange has several Canada-based mining companies that enrich themselves and their investors by exploiting African resources. So wondered if any of you wanted to comment on that.
I'll take it on. I don't know what the question exactly is, but I do know that Canada has been one of the countries, sorry to use this word, that's been raping the Congo and pillaging the Congo's minerals. And it's funny because on one hand, we always look at the colonizers as Britain and France, and we forget Canada. And I don't think I have a solution for it or anything like this, but there's we as Congolese people are actually tired of that. We're tired of knocking on I've been on the Hill for the past, and I'm not even exaggerating, I think for the past almost 20 years, where we've had marches and whatnot, sit-ins, and when Harper was still prime minister to now, and we're not being heard. Our voices are not being heard because, of course, it's bringing a lot of money to Canada. I remember, I think, with the Carlton, for example, Canada, this is a couple of years ago, about 2015 or so, Canada made about $4 billion in mining in 1 year from the Congo alone. We've tried telling the government, but again, they don't care because, of course, it's Africans and our voices are not that big. And I think in the future, it takes people like myself who are Canadian Congolese, right, who can stand in front of my peer Canadians and say, hey, stop doing this to my other people in the Congo. But even then, they're not listening. So I don't remember what the question was, but I just wanted to bring it up just because I know that Canadian mining corporations in the Congo are absolutely destroying the Congolese people. And you talk about blood diamonds. Well, Canada has a lot of blood on the Congolese minerals, and I think it's about time we as Canadians start denouncing our government for it.
Great, thank you, Patrick. I'll keep adding more questions, and sorry, Ruva, please.
Oh, sorry. So, because I wanted to add a little bit on to this, because I think this is one of those things where education is so important, because like Patrick has says, I think these are things that often Canadians don't know about and are very important for a lot of conversations we're having, including when people talk about, people coming to Canada either as immigrants or as refugees, and people ask, why does Canada need to help these people? And it's because, well, oftentimes the very circumstances that they are escaping or leaving are caused by, the what's it called, the fallout from Canadian mining operations, and we talk about these things, are also tied into climate in Canada and climate action, because the countries that are very much facing the consequences of climate change are the ones that are doing the least, and then countries like Canada, who are, contributing in an outsized way, are the ones who are most able to mitigate the effects. And so I think centralizing these conversations is important, especially during something like Black History Month, because people often won't see the connections between Black History Month and things like climate or mining. But these things are very much specifically intertwined, and how that kind of environmental racism ties into environmental racism here in Canada, and how it ties into different struggles, environmental, of Indigenous land claims here in Canada, because a lot of the times it's, if not those same mining companies who are, violating Indigenous rights in Canada, that are violating, rights in Africa, or companies that are very closely tied together. And I think these things both are sometimes saddening to hear how big and complex these systems are, but also it gives us a chance to understand why it's so important that all of our different sectors are working together on these issues, as big as they may be.
Thank you, Ruva. And in the chat, there's now a link to a part of the Kairos website that talks about environmental racism and making corporations accountable. So we can explore that further. It further deepens the conversation that we are having at the moment. So again, the next question is for anyone who would like to respond. And this question is, how do you think that social media or technology in general, for that matter, has helped or hindered the advancement of your culture or race when it comes to anti-racism? So that's for anyone who would like to respond. Yes, please, Ed.
First, I guess one is we've all heard it now. The "O Canada" was sung just days ago. That they tweaked the song, which in a positive way. I think social media has really helped that message to come out. It helped First Nation people, for example, with the finding of residential school buried children. But looking at another way, we have these keyboard warriors that are going out and recording that drunk Indian, and this is how we are, and this thieving Indian, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same as, I watch it on social media. It's seen with black people. They record, the negativity, and that's what kind of sticks in everybody's mind. Sadly, the positive things that our cultures and our people put out there are kind of pushed off to the side, and yeah, okay, and we did that, no big deal. You know what I mean? So social media could be a positive and a negative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Ruva or Patrick, would you like to respond to this question?
I think for me, we definitely saw the impact, especially during 2020 and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. It's so unfortunate because things like, well, if the video of police killings hadn't been circulated through social media, I don't know if there would have been that much of an impact or a movement through these types of things. And so I think when we are given more space and ways to connect, across, countries and borders, across provinces in the country, we are able to better organize, we are able to better understand what's going on, and to prove what's going on, because things like police brutality people have been talking about for decades and decades, and until people were able to see the videos. A lot of the time, unfortunately, we weren't believed or people weren't caring, but social media has really allowed voices to be amplified. And yeah, like Ed said, I think it has also allowed a lot of hate to be amplified, unfortunately, and it's allowed a lot of people to organize, against things like anti-racism. But I think overall, because of it allows us to connect, I think that is really what about social media has furthered these movements, especially through, the pandemic. It allowed people to connect even when we couldn't connect physically.
I think for me, social media, what it's allowed to do, I'm old enough to remember, for example, Rodney King. Not that I was old enough to understand what was going on, but I'm old enough, I was 12 years old or something when that happened. But that was just one camera, and probably in America, in California, and the riot that happened, the LA riot, for those that were old enough to remember. What 2020 did for me personally, and just to give a little background of my my childhood, I grew up in South Africa. Even though I said I'm Congolese, I was born in Congo, but I'm actually a Mzansi boy, so South African. So River, I said that just for you, actually, since you're Zimbabwean. So I did see Nelson Mandela coming out of prison, for example. I saw the whole movement and the fight and the whole liberation movement that was happening at the time. And I'd never felt that again until the summer of 2020. And at this point, it's this was like 30 years later, and I felt a movement where I could see, for example, John Boyega in London crying his eyes out, and me realizing that, not me realizing that I knew that, but I just knew that, you know what, Black Brits are also going through the same thing, you know. And then you see the French banlieues or suburbs, and what the French people were doing, burning cars and stuff like this, is because, you know, the French and the Arab kids. I'm like, oh my God, this is a collective thing, right? The Americans, and then Canadians also started speaking out, saying, oh my God, we're hurting too. We're hurting. And that was social media showing us that we are all in this collective thing, which is against racism and racism for all of us. And there was such a unity that came within marginalized people. You know, I still have goosebumps actually. Here in Ottawa, went down for the march, and there was somebody who had a thing saying, "Protect Black and Indigenous women." Right. And it was like, and it felt like it gave us a voice. It gave us a voice to talk. So I will talk about the good thing about social media in that aspect, that it did give us a voice to feel that we're not crazy. You know, we're not, excuse to use the word, but we're not just talking out of whatever. We are actually, this is our realities, whether it's in some of us even, you know, left workplaces and stuff like that, because, you know, it became to a point where we realized that microaggression that was not only happening in our workplaces, but it was happening at the stores, was happening at our soccer games, was happening at the airports, was happening all over the Western world. And all that, I think it's due to social media for making us realize that we are not alone. Right. And going back to Patrice Lumumba, he did say that one line, we are not alone. You know, people from all those marginalized places feel the same pain that we do. And that was the beauty of social media. Now, of course, social media also does have its bad aspect of it, like the misinformations and stuff like that. But I think in terms of fighting for you know, for our Blackness or for our rights and stuff like that, social media was a very, very good tool, especially in the summer of 2020, when we all collectively realized that we're hurting.
Amazing. Thank you, Patrick, Ruva, and Ed. We are nearing the end of our time together, and you have shared so many insights so far. I just wondered if each of you might want to offer a last word, last sentence, challenge, encouragement, anything along those lines. So kind of your last send out, what would you like to say to people? And we can go in any order. Yes, Ruva, please.
Okay, I know today for many of us is the first day of Lent, and I think I would encourage us to, I know it's almost the end of February, but extend your Black History Month. Maybe, you know, learn events, but, you know, try and now throughout this Lent, you know, keeping that spirit maybe of anti-racism and learning throughout the next 40 days, extend your Black History Month.
I'll say, going back to, as you can tell, I'm all about quoting Patrice Lumumba today. So I'll quote Patrice Lumumba again, and I'll do this in French, so I hope the translator, the interpreters can actually get this for the English speakers. Entre la liberté et l'esclavage, il n'y a pas de compromis. And basically,
there's no compromise between
on our liberty and our freedom on everything about us. We should never compromise. We should be proud Black people, should be proud Indigenous people. We should be proud whoever we are, and we should never, ever, ever just forget that about who we are. So entre la liberté et l'esclavage, n'y a pas de compromis. There should be no compromising for that. And that's the last thing I'll say.
I'll say that I've learned a lot of stuff here. I'm embarrassed to say that the Black history of Canada is basically like the Aboriginal history of Canada. It amazes me that our cultures, and I said this earlier, it amazes me that our cultures are so, we're both, going down the same path and went down the same path. And I'm glad that we're sitting here today and we're talking about our cultures, talking about our rights, we're talking about our freedoms, we're talking about, who we are and what we can do as a society. I just have to say, Miigwech, thank you very much for allowing me to sit here, allow me to be part of your Black History event here. That even though I'm Aboriginal and Anishinaabe, we're trying to celebrate the history of Black culture and Black people in Canada. That I'm allowed to sit here and just listen to amazing stories. So I just want to say, Miigwech, thank you very much for that. For that.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Rachel, Ruva, Ed, Patrick, for your insights. It's been a really rich conversational time. In a moment, we're going to turn it back over to Radia to share some announcements. But about Black History Month or Black-led organization that you would like to share with everybody, please feel free to add that into the chat. I see some people are adding that already. There's some suggestions for children's books, websites, and different ideas. So please continue to add that into the chat before we go. And these will be, you can take these away as resources. So please feel free to add into the chat anything that you think would be helpful for the good as a whole. So thank you once again to our panelists. We're not quite done. We're going over to Radia now for some closing announcements, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Adele, and once again, thank you for the panelists. This was really a very rich, powerful, and really beautiful discussion. So I'm very humbled and grateful to have been able to hear your stories and your experiences. I also want to thank Davisha and Doreen for sharing so beautiful and powerful words. Honestly, it was very, very emotional. And we want to let you know that we have an art showcase right now that is our way to celebrate the culture and accomplishments of the Black communities and its allies. So we invite youth around the world to create artwork, visual arts, performing arts, musical pieces, or even written art along the themes of Black pride and Black joy and allyship and solidarity and resistance. And please upload that and share that with us. We'll be very happy to share that throughout the month during our Black History Month video also that we're preparing. So I'm putting the link here in the chat. We're going to ask you to please share that link and encourage people to please participate in this art showcase. A few other advocacy pieces that we want to share with you. So Kairos has been conducting a letter writing campaign to help get Bill C-226 on environmental racism, along with 2 corporate accountability bills passed. So we need to keep up the pressure, and we ask that you please write to your MPs today to support these bills. I'm also putting the link here in the chat. And then finally, we would also ask you to help support grassroots women organizations by joining us in urging the Canadian government to increase its international assistance envelope. And here again, the link is in the chat, so feel free to check out those links, send those emails, and share with your networks. So yeah, as we mentioned, we want to give maybe the opportunity for some people who want to share anything, or some Black-led organization. If there's anything that you want to share, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll give you a few minutes to share a bit. If not, then we'll pass it on to Barbara.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Radia. So, so my name is Barbara Mangwende. I am the Director of Programs at Kairos. I'm honored to do this last part of the agenda, just the closing remarks and thank yous. What an inspiring event this afternoon, marking Black History Month, hosted by Kairos, our first ever event. So we've heard from different voices on this panel who are Black activists in their communities, people of Afro descent and from the diaspora, how they have expressed and celebrated resistance in the past, present, and what it means for the future. We've also heard what anti-colonial ways of resistance exist and how they can be utilized and expanded upon to advance the work globally of anti-Black racism. I'm hoping you found this event inspiring, educational, informative, and perhaps instilling pride in you, which is really my key takeaway. I'm feeling more proudful to be a Black person of African descent living in Canada. The celebrations will continue as we feature an art showcase with the goal of showcasing the culture and accomplishments of the Black community and its allies, as alluded by Radia already. But I wanted to take the opportunity to say congratulations and well done to everybody. This was a remarkable event. And also, I would like to take this time to read a reflection from Aisha Francis, the Executive Director of Kairos, who couldn't be here with us today. I simply want to acknowledge the work of the Equity Working Group in bringing our inaugural Black History Month event to fruition. While I'm not able to be there to share in the celebration and showcasing of Black brilliance and voice towards efforts and action of resistance, I'm invested in this moment and see it as a Kairos moment. The work we do at Kairos is through solidarity relationships with many people, partners, and communities here in Canada and globally. Kairos is committed to advancing our work of activism and resistance in the areas of migrant justice, ecological justice, gender rights, and Indigenous rights. We step into this opportune moment to teach, to learn, to celebrate, and to be in solidarity with Black voices of resistance. So thank you, Aisha. That was her reflection for this event. So behind every successful event, there is a great team. I would like to take the opportunity on behalf of Kairos to say thank you and show our appreciation to, first of all, the event funder, that's Canadian Race Relations Foundation, whose financial support made this event possible. The panel members who said yes to the invitation to this plenary session that was themed Voices of Resistance, a celebration of Black history and imagining futures. Just for a very engaging and inspiring session. So firstly, there's Adele Halliday, United Church of Canada Anti-Racism and Equity Lead, Rachel Juan, South Sudan Council of Churches, Black Lives Matter and Ruva Gwekerere, Citizens for Public Justice intern, then Ed Collins, Fort William First Nation, Patrick Kabeya, documentary film producer, then Davisha Francis for this spoken word artist. And also the participants of the art showcase from around the world who have submitted and are still submitting various artworks, including visual arts, performing arts, musical pieces, written art along the themes of Black pride and joy, allyship, solidarity, and resistance. Last but not least, just appreciating everyone who has participated in this inspiring events today, including Cairo staff, partners, volunteers, supporters. And without your participation, this event would not have been as enriching and as successful as it has been. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and happy rest of Black History Month. Thank you so much.